I'm a storyteller, is what I get to do. For those of you who weren't here last night, my name's Joel. I am an RC. You guys say that really weird. I'm an Australian, and I'm a poet. I get to travel around and share my poetry, to perform at lots of different places, from churches to pubs to cafes to erotic literature nights. That was one of my latest. I went on just after the Naked Snake Dancer. And then me, and I took off my shirt. No, I didn't. But it was a beautiful time. I went on and I actually led them in it was a kind of hippie new age crew, and I led them in breath prayer around the words Yahweh. And I did my poetry over the top of this as they did it, and it was a beautiful moment of seeing people. A whole bunch of them came up to me afterwards and said that was, and these are the guys who go to kind of the, what's the equivalent over here? Burning Man kind of stuff, and they said that was the most spiritual experience that I had. And that wasn't about me. That wasn't about me and any kind of capacity that I have. That was because the presence of God doesn't dwell here. As in, the presence of God does dwell here, yes, but the presence of God dwells in every single place in this world where we deem that He shouldn't be. That's where He is. And He calls us to join Him there. One of those places for me is in schools. I get to go in schools a lot. And I love my work in schools because I get to hear a lot of bad poetry from year 8 boys who like to write about football and other things. I wish that I had collected all of my all the weird, strange images and metaphors that my kids have written me over the years. I found someone who had, and so I just thought I'd share a few of these with you tonight. Hopefully they will come up. Here's a good one. The sun was below the watery horizon, like a diabetic grandma easing into a warm salt bath. Beautiful. What about this one? Her eyes twinkled like the moustache of a man with a cold. She grew on him like she was a colony of E. coli and he was room temperature Canadian beef. Her eyes were like the stars, not because they twinkle, but because they were so far apart. It was as easy as taking candy from a diabetic man who no longer wishes to eat candy. And lastly, my favorite, their love burned with the fiery intensity of a urinary tract infection. Isn't that some stunning metaphor work right there? What? I'm glad those translated for you guys. So I get to go into schools, to juvenile justice centers, to Indigenous communities, to refugee communities, and I help young people tell their story. It's one of the key parts of my work that I do, to express, to tell them that their story matters, that it counts, no matter who they are, no matter which place in the world they have come from or had to flee from, their story matters and we need to hear their voice. But as you know, when we come to do this as any creative artists, we sit there and we have what I would call the foreboding blankness of an empty page. Has anyone who's sat there with a blank piece of paper, staring up at them, silent and empty, and you try to start, but nothing quite fits right in your head, and then your perfectionist kicks in, and your negative inner critic gets louder and louder, and you've been told what this should look like, what poetry should look like, what painting should look like, but it won't come out quite like that, or what the picture in your head, and people will just think it's silly anyway, and you don't know where to even start, and so you just give up. Who's had that? Let's have some honesty. Oh, look, probably all of us, absolutely. The empty page is one of those things that we kind of freak out at and get really nervous around, and we don't know where to go with it. We get stuck. We get stuck because we've been told for so long what this should look like. One of my jobs going into schools is to help teenagers kind of unlearn what they think poetry should be before they can truly write poetry. Vincent knew this. Well, we went backwards then. Vincent knew about urinary tract infections. Vincent knew this. He said, just slap anything on when you see a blank canvas staring you in the face like some imbecile. You don't know how paralyzing that is, that stare of a blank canvas is, which says to the painter, you can't do a thing. The canvas has an idiotic stare and mesmerizes some painters so much that they turn into idiots themselves. Many painters are afraid in front of the blank canvas, but the blank canvas is afraid of the real, passionate painter who dares and who has broken the spell of you can't once and for all. Vincent's one of my absolute heroes. What happens for us as we face that empty page, for many of us, is fear takes over. Fear takes over and it causes a whole bunch of different, what I would say are creative blocks. Creative blocks that stop us, that kind of take over our lives, from perfectionism, I can't get this right, that kind of kicks into a laziness and an apathy. I want to do this thing, but I just kind of find myself binge watching Netflix instead, again and again and again. We fear those external critics and what they will say. We fear that we can't make it look right, or perhaps that we can't live up to our past successes. I wrote this poem and it just exploded, and now how the heck am I going to do anything that will move and transform people again? We're taught what this should look like by those around us, by those teachers, by whoever it is, or our ego and our pride gets in, our questions, what if they reject it? That internal critic comes up. We compare with other people. I couldn't be no John Mark McMillan. How could I even think of writing a song? What does that even look like? I couldn't do it in the past. What makes me think I could do it now? We can't translate what's in our head to become the final product. Simply, I'm not good enough. Turn to the person next to you for like 10 seconds, and I want you to tell them which of these is your big one. Which creative block do you give yourself to, whether you want to or not? Go, have a really quick chat. Friends, what I want to put to you guys tonight is simply this. Those creative blocks, those things that stop us from the creativity that we could give ourselves to. Let me ask you this question. Let's take it away from creativity for a second. I want to ask you this question. Who of you has sat there and tried to pray, and the blank piece of paper that is God sits there silent and empty, and then your perfectionist kicks in, the one that tells you should have your life together by now and be this Christian person that you're meant to be, and then your negative inner critic gets louder and louder and louder, and you've been told what this Christian thing should look like, haven't you? So you know that when you can't live it out like they do, when we compare ourselves to the spiritual gurus who stand up on the stage and have it all together, our inner critic gets louder and louder, and we feel more guilty and more shamed, and you know it, our lives won't come out as we want it to, and you don't even know where to start. And so in the face of this empty page of our life, we just give up. Has anyone had that before? You see, what I put to you tonight, could it be that the creative blocks that we have are actually exactly the same as our spiritual blocks? That what stops you from creating when you sit there and deal with that empty page, it's the same thing that stops you in terms of your life as a Christian. The perfectionism, the not feeling good enough, the comparison to other people, and you freeze in those moments and feel like you're not a good enough Christian, whatever the heck that means. Because it's the same thing when I say I'm not a good enough poet. That doesn't mean nothing. I begin with where I am and I create out of that place. And as a Christian, you begin with where you are and you create and you live out of that place. Does that make sense? And what I want to put to you guys as well is not only with our spirituality, where an incredible lady named Julia Cameron, she actually says creativity is an experience, a spiritual experience. It doesn't matter which way you think of it, creativity leading to spirituality or spirituality leading to creativity. In fact, I do not make a distinction between the two, she says. And I would say not only with our spiritual reality, our spiritual blocks, but I'm going to say also our relational blocks. The same stuff that stops us from our creativity, that stops us from our vertical connection to God and how we engage with that is the same stuff that stops us from our horizontal relationships. That we don't feel good enough about ourselves, so we keep people out here. That we don't measure up, we don't feel like we measure up, so we have this inner critic perfectionist kicks in as to what our relationship should look like, as to what my sexuality should look like, as to all these things that come and to play into our lives, our relationality, how we engage with people. And what we do is I would say the deepness that we let God into our lives and into our stuff is the deepness that we let others into our lives and into our stuff. Is the deepness from which our creativity shall come. But we don't like it. So we keep it all out here because we know that it costs. We know that it costs us. And it meets something in us. A lady named Julia Cameron, she says this: most of the time when we are blocked in an area of our life, it is because we feel safer that way. We may not be happy, but at least we know what we are. Much fear of creativity is the fear of the unknown. After a while, we come to realize that many of those who are blocked are so because they are getting a payoff from it. It has become their crux, their identity, their martyrdom. As blocked creatives, we are willing to go to almost any lengths to remain blocked. Julia. You see, out of safety always comes risk. There's a sense of fear that comes with it. Fear will take us to a place of stuckness, but when we risk, we actually end up at a place of freedom, creative freedom, spiritual freedom, relational freedom, but it takes us taking that step away from our safety that's a bit more like a prison, and we sit in our prison and the door is there and there's a key to that door sitting right next to us, but we stay seated in our prison. And isn't it Christ who said, I've come to set them free? It is for freedom that you have been set free. If it's for freedom that we've been set free, then we kind of need to choose that. And for me, the way that we choose that is this. If it's true, if our creative, spiritual, relational, and our social blocks are the same, because they come from that same drive within us, then our journey towards freedom for each is also the same. Let me put it to you like this: that when we begin to work on our creative freedom, on doing the things that will set us free from our creative blocks, we are also working on the things that will set us free relationally and spiritually. That we are giving ourselves to something. So the way that I do this with my students is I tell them the thing that will stop you from writing a good poem is trying to write what a good poem should look like. Anyone who tries to write poetry, my encouragement is stop trying to write a good poem and just write whatever comes out. It's when we get hooked on this idea of what a good poem should look like. And so I'd say the same. The thing that will stop you from a good spiritual life is trying to live what a good spiritual life should look like. We have these ideas and we get stuck in them. Does this make sense? Yeah. So when we begin to give ourselves, instead of to the shoulds, but rather to the God who says, I love you right where you are, exactly as you are, with your stumbling and your bumbling and your whacked out painting and your poetry that sometimes you wish you had better words to write and all of that stuff. When we begin to accept that, when we just begin, when we make a mark, because it's the only way to begin. Joseph Chilton Pearce says, to live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. We make a mark and we make a mess of it in our creativity and in our lives. Again, Julia Cameron says, remember your artist is a child. Find and protect that child. Learning to let yourself create is like learning to walk. The artist child must begin by crawling. Mistakes are necessary. Stumbles are normal. These are baby steps. Progress, not perfection, is what we should be asking of ourselves. And I would say because that is what God is asking of us. This can go against the ego's grain. We want to be great immediately, but that's not how recovery works. It's an awkward, tentative, even embarrassing process. God doesn't want your perfect self. God just wants you just as you are. Now, I can explain it like this, but I think the best way to explain it always is with a children's book. Let me finish with this children's book. Ish by Peter H. Reynolds. Ramon loved to draw. There he is drawing. Anytime, anything, and anywhere. One day, Ramon was drawing a vase of flowers. His brother Leon leaned over his shoulder. Leon burst out laughing. "What is that?" he asked. Ramon couldn't even answer. He just crumpled up the drawing and threw it across the room. Leon's laughter haunted Ramon. He kept trying to make his drawings look right, but they never did. After many months and many crumpled sheets of paper, Ramon put his pencil down. "I'm done," he said. Marisol, his sister, was watching him. "What do you want?" he snapped. "I'm watching you draw," she said. Ramon said, "I'm not drawing, go away." And Marisol ran away, but not before picking up a crumpled sheet of paper. "Hey, come back here with that." Ramon raced after Marisol up the hall and into her room. He was about to yell, but fell silent when he saw his sister's walls. "This is one of my favorites," Marisol said, pointing. "Well, that was supposed to be a vase of flowers," Ramon said, "but it doesn't look like one." "Well, it looks vase-ish," she exclaimed. "Vase-ish?" Ramon looked closer, then he studied all the drawings on Marisol's walls and began to see them in a whole new way. "They do look ish," he said. Ramon felt light and energized. Thinking ishly allowed his ideas to flow freely. He began to draw what he felt, loose lines quickly springing out without worry. Ramon once again drew and drew the world around him. Making an ish drawing felt wonderful, so he filled his journals with tree-ish, house-ish, boat-ish, afternoon-ish, fish-ish, sun-ish. Ramon realized he could draw ish feelings too, like peace-ish, silly-ish, excited-ish. His ish art inspired ish writing. He wasn't sure if he was writing poems, but they were poem-ish. Pond, ponder, dream yonder, pond, yond, gleam, wander, by Ramon. And then one spring morning, Ramon had a wonderful feeling. It was a feeling that even ish words and ish drawings could not capture. He decided not to capture it. Instead, he simply savored it. And Ramon lived ishly ever after. What a beautiful, stunning book, hey? Now, the two things I want to say to finish about this book. The first is obvious. Go and create ishly in this world. Go and create ishly. Get rid of that perfectionist streak that stops you, that is your creative block. Just give yourself the freedom to not have to write good poetry, to not have to paint good paintings, just to create, to play. That's what it is inside us. Give yourself that freedom and just let it splurge out of you. Go create ishly and go live ishly in this world. I do not have this life together. I don't have this Christian thing together. I seek to follow Jesus, but I know it's following ish. And here's what I want to say to you. Most of us think that the character of God in this book is the older brother Leon looking over the shoulder judging, critiquing. But what I want to say to you guys is this. God is not Leon, God is Marisol. He picks up the crumpled sheets of your life, those things you screwed up and you threw away thinking that was too bad, that I screwed up, that I did this wrong, that I always do this wrong, that I can't live this Christian life, that I'm not good enough, that I should be like this, that I'm not like those people up on the stage. God takes all those crumpled up sheets of paper, He runs up to His room, He plasters your life on the gallery that is His, and He says, "This is my daughter, this is my son, look at what they do, it's so ishly wonderful." Friends, let us let ourselves off the hook because God has done that. May you know that everything you thought was wrong with who you are is plastered on the walls of God's bedroom, and He loves you just as you are in all your mess. So let us go and live ishly in this world. Thank you.